A very good evening to you and welcome to this second of two information sessions about minerals exploration in Western Victoria. Thank you for taking the time out of your evenings to attend this session. My name is Brett Milsom and I'm the Acting Manager of Community and Stakeholder Engagement with the Minerals team within the Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions. I'd like to start tonight's session by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm coming to you from tonight, which for me is the Gunai-Kurnai people, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. As this is an online session, there will be a number of you joining this from right across Victoria, and I'd encourage you to take a moment to also acknowledge the traditional owners from the land on wherever it is that you might be joining us from tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge any elected officials we might have on this evening's session from all levels of government, state, local and federal, particularly any councillors that might be joining us from within the three local government areas within this block, and that is the Northern Grampians Shire Council, the Ararat Shire Council and the Horsham Rural City. Welcome. Tonight's session is really an opportunity for us to provide you with some further information about minerals exploration in Western Victoria. And this has really come off the back of the recent awarding of an exploration licence to a company called Gippsland Prospecting, who you'll also hear from tonight, and they'll be talking a bit about their plans for exploration in the area. This has really all come about as a result of a project that was called the Stavely Minerals Exploration Initiative, which was a program undertaken by the department, and we'll talk a bit more about that a little bit later on in the session, just so you've got the relevant background as to how all this has come about. This is the fourth licence that's been awarded as part of that, and we've done a number of these sessions over the course of the last several months and years, some in person and some due to COVID restrictions. We've been forced to take these virtual, and despite COVID restrictions, it is still great that we're able to brief you on this matter and hopefully provide you with a little bit more information about this. Before we start tonight, a couple of housekeeping items. So all of you that are on this session are in listen-only mode. So that means we can't actually see you. That, however, doesn't mean that you're not able to ask a question. And there's two ways of doing that tonight. The first option you have is in the chat function through the Microsoft Teams platform. You'll see on the slide just there two little speech bubbles just next to the leave button there. If you click those, there'll be an opportunity for you to type in a question, and we'd encourage you to do so as they might come to mind throughout the night, and we've allocated plenty of time at the end of the session to get through as many of those as we can. And we'll also be circulating any responses to those that we don't get a chance to answer tonight or that we might take on notice. Just do be mindful that that button is right next to the leave button. If for some reason you do by accident click the leave button, you can just get back in through the link that's been circulated to you and that you originally used. Alternatively, if you're having any troubles with that means, you can also phone or text my colleague Donna, whose number is there at the bottom of the screen. You can also text her or call her with any sort of technical issues or difficulties that you might be having with the platform. Hopefully it's working relatively seamlessly for all of you tonight. In terms of what you can expect from tonight's session, we'll provide an overview of minerals exploration and the Stavely Ground Release Initiative, which is really the catalyst for why we're here tonight, and also some further information about a tool the department has developed regarding land access consent and access to private property for explorers to undertake their exploration programs. I'll then hand over to the team from Gippsland Prospecting, who will provide some further detail about their exploration program within the area. And then there will be an opportunity for questions at the end, both questions of us as departmental representatives and also questions of representatives from Gippsland Prospecting. That's really all of it on the housekeeping side of things, so we might get straight into it. And probably the first question that comes to a lot of your minds with tonight's sessions is really, what does this minerals exploration all mean, particularly if you might live within the what we call the Block 4 area that has recently been licensed. Now, some of you might have attended some sessions back in 2019 where we spoke about the Stavely ground release, which was then a tender process to attract explorers to the region, and that might have been your first sort of foray or introduction to this issue. For others, it might have been that the letter you received in your mailbox alerting you to this session, or some of the local media coverage that you've heard promoting these sessions, and it might be an entirely new concept. So in terms of there's probably a number of questions I think that we'll go to straight up front, and that is, what does it actually mean for you? Will the explorer be looking to access your land to undertake their exploration program, and what will you actually see within the community? So I'm going to go through those one by one. And in terms of what does it actually mean for you, the answer really to that question is not a great deal. Minerals exploration is an activity that has gone on for decades right across Victoria and continues to do so, and probably for a number of you that activity has taken place right under your noses, and you may not have even observed it or known about it. So it is very different to mining activity. It's important to make that distinction between what is minerals exploration, which is much more under the radar, so to speak, than mining activity that you can physically obviously see a mine. In terms of access to private land, or potentially your land, for an explorer to undertake their exploration program, yes, in many cases explorers do approach private landholders and look to access their property to undertake minerals exploration. The important point to stress here, though, is that is often a very small number of landholders, and that negotiation takes place in a very sort of one-on-one fashion. Minerals exploration, by its very nature, is quite targeted, and so the explorer will often approach a small number of landholders and obviously commence those negotiations with them to gain that consent to access the property. In terms of what you might see within the community, most likely the extent of it will be the occasional truck and vehicle here and there. It might be a regional office presence. But again, when it comes to exploration, the profile in comparison to mining is much smaller. And to be honest, this is probably activity that, as I mentioned earlier, has been going on for quite some time, that you may have been unaware of, and will probably continue to do so. The other important point to note here is that there is an economic benefit that's associated with minerals exploration activity. So when an explorer does go into a region and deliver and undertake an exploration program, they obviously do spend money locally, and that extends to things like food, fuel and car and vehicle repairs at local service stations, accommodation, so on and so forth. In fact, since 2018, minerals exploration expenditure in Western Victoria local government areas has exceeded $41 million, and across the Stavely ground release area, we're expecting that number to exceed $20 million, and that's spending that supports rural businesses and creates jobs. So I made the point just then that minerals exploration is really a common occurrence right across all of Victoria, and it's taking place all around you. It does so now, and it has done for a great number of decades. It's certainly nothing new to Western Victoria, and it's certainly nothing new to most parts of the state. In fact, over 30% of the state is under an exploration licence at any one time. And the important distinguishing point to make here is that only 0.02% of the state actually has a mining footprint. And this goes to the point I raised earlier about being really clear about the distinction between what is minerals exploration, which is what we're talking about here tonight, and what is actually mining activity, which is very different. in essence, the exploration activity is obviously the precursor to what might be mining activity, but there's a lot of time and water to go under the bridge before it may get to that point, and we'll come to some of those statistics a little bit later on. The other point I want to stress here is that minerals exploration readily coexists with other land uses. So a large amount of this exploration that has previously done and continues to take place across Victoria does so on private property rather than Crown land, and that's generally agricultural land. And farmers and exploration companies have for many years been quietly and successfully negotiating access to private property, and with that compensation where appropriate to allow for explorers to undertake their work. In the coming days, we will provide registered attendees for this session with some further links that provide some further information about this, and included in that will be a video that has some experience, that also has some farmers from Victoria recounting their own experiences in dealing with exploration companies that are undertaking work on their property. They're landholders from Cathcart and Serpentine. So I'd encourage you to take the time to watch that if you do get a moment. All right, so why are we here tonight is largely due to the recent awarding of a minerals exploration licence to Gippsland Prospecting, as I touched on earlier, as part of the Stavely ground release. Now, this is really the culmination of what we've termed the Stavely Minerals Exploration Initiative, which was a program undertaken by the Victorian government some years ago, looking at minerals prospectivity in Western Victoria. And as part of that program, a whole number of activities were undertaken, including geoscience programs to identify areas with the most potential and prospectivity for mineral discoveries, consultation with regional community leaders about land uses and key environmental and water, cultural and other assets, an assessment of the existing legislation and land use planning processes to confirm that sensitive areas in that part of Victoria would be protected, and ultimately making available areas suitable for minerals exploration to encourage the best exploration programs. And we did that through a competitive tender process. As part of that process, 6 successful tenderers have been identified, and 4 of those blocks have since been licensed, the 4th of which is obviously Gippsland Prospecting, which is why we're here tonight. This is an area that, as you can see on the map there, it's the area shaded within the blue outline and covers an area of just over 800 square kilometres. I won't talk too much about Gippsland Prospecting's exploration program, other than to say that under their licence they are able to look for gold, copper and other minerals, but I will leave the more detailed information for them to provide as part of their presentation a little bit later on in the night. The area covered by the licence includes the areas of Mokpilly, Illawarra, Pomonal, Moyston and Wollora North, but an important point to stress here is that it does not include Halls Gap, Dadswells Bridge, or most importantly for all of you, I would think out that way, the Grampians National Park. If you are after further information regarding other licences awarded as part of this process, the Stavely Ground Release I'm referring to there, or other minerals exploration licences in general in your area, there is a tool available on the Victorian Government's website called Licences Near Me. And what you can do with that tool is essentially enter your own address, or you can zoom in on a particular area of a map, and it brings up the minerals and petroleum and other resource licenses that might be located over or nearby your property. Before we get to talking about the land access consent tool, I do want to provide some further information about some of the things that we can rule out right up front in regards to this exploration that it will be undertaken within Block 4. The first point to make there is that explorers will not be looking for gas or for coal. That isn't a commodity that's listed in their licence, and therefore they will not be and are unable to look for that. As a reminder, fracking is prohibited in Victoria, as is exploration and mining of any type in all Victorian and national state parks, which means there'll be no activity in either the Grampians or the Arapalis. In terms of the commodities being looked for, I did mention that it's gold, copper and base metals in the case of Gippsland prospecting, and that's true for all 6 of the successful tenderers as part of the Stavely ground release. Gippsland prospecting has excised some Crown land from its licence, and with the remaining Crown land due, native title processes were followed and no claims were lodged on determined Crown land. The other point to note there is that the Federal Court has determined that native titles were extinguished in this area, and roads and road reserves are taken as having extinguished native title. However, there may be other areas of Crown land where native title has been extinguished by some previous exclusive possession act, such as a commercial or a residential lease. I mentioned earlier that minerals exploration and agriculture have coexisted for a number of years, and one of the key reasons for that is that explorers must operate under a highly regulated regime in Victoria. So minerals exploration licences are granted under a piece of legislation called the Mineral Resources Sustainable Development Act 1990. And that's really the key legislation that sets out licence conditions and the processes for getting approvals for exploration work programs in Victoria. It also governs the requirements for gaining consent to private land and for starting work on Crown land for minerals exploration. While that is the primary piece of legislation, it's critical to note here that it's not the only piece of legislation and regulation that applies to mining and exploration. In fact, there's more than 20 other acts and associated regulations that provide safeguards over special places and special things and govern what explorers can do. And some of those safeguards provided through these other acts and regulations extend to things like national parks, waterways and aquifers, native vegetation, cultural and Indigenous heritage, and threatened plants and species. And it's the explorer's legal responsibility to make sure that they're adhering to all of the laws and regulations that govern their activities, not just the piece of legislation related to mining, which obviously in this case is the Mineral Resources Sustainable Development Act. I talked earlier about the distinction between minerals exploration and mining, and I want to come back to that point again here to provide some further context around that and some of the, I guess, timelines and statistics around that. So in Victoria, the figure that's often quoted is that only 1 in 300 exploration licences will result in a discovery of a commercially viable resource, and many, in fact, in the minerals industry and would suggest a far more conservative figure, and that's something far more like, say, 1 in 600 or even as far as 1 in 1,000. The other point to note there is that it takes an average of 12 years to prove the existence of an economically viable deposit and to progress from exploration activity, which is what we're talking about now, to potentially ultimately becoming a mining operation. And there's a whole lot of water that needs to go under the bridge during that period, and environmental approvals to be obtained, design and economic studies, of course, and community engagement and public engagement about any proposed development or mine. So that's quite some way down the track, if and only if a commercially viable resource deposit was to be identified. And it's very important to stress here that we are just talking about minerals exploration. We're not necessarily tonight talking about mining activity. So onto the topic of land access, and the question that we often get asked is whether you have to give consent at all, and how that's to be achieved if you are to be approached by a minerals exploration company that's looking to access your property to undertake and deliver its exploration program. And there's a couple of points I want to make here. The first of which is that in Victoria, which is in line with all other states in Australia, the Crown owns the minerals on behalf of the people, and that gives the Victorian government the right to grant licenses to companies to search for minerals, and they can generally undertake that search on both Crown land and on freehold land. So in response to the question of do you have to give consent to the explorer, the answer to that is that yes, you can say no to the explorer, but there is a really important caveat to that, and a point that I really want to stress here, and that is that under the Mineral Resources Sustainable Development Act, the explorer can take landholders to VCAT or the Supreme Court, and they may only rule on the level of compensation. So this implies that they will not rule on the matter of access. So just to repeat that, under the MRSDA, the explorer can take landholders to VCAT or the Supreme Court, and they will only rule on the level of compensation, not on the matter of access. While that is the case, if it does get to that point, I will add that such an outcome is in fact quite rare, and more often than not, explorers and landholders are actually able to come to an arrangement and an agreement that's mutually advantageous to both parties. So I think the key point there is to really go into this with an open mind and keep those lines of communication with an explorer if you are to be approached by them looking to access your property. Keep those lines of communication open, because you do have the right to negotiate the terms and conditions under which an explorer may access your private land. And you may also, as part of that, need to negotiate compensation that's payable to you should you experience any loss of income or amenity that might arise from that exploration activity. Which inevitably lends itself to the question, how do you go about doing that? And I hope that information I've just provided has provided some background, some context. In terms of starting those discussions and potentially negotiating that consent with an explorer to access your property, another key purpose of tonight's session is to really introduce you to a tool that's been developed by the department in conjunction with the Victorian Farmers Federation to help landholders and exploration companies discuss and agree upon access to your private property for minerals exploration purposes. We call it a tool, but in actual fact, it is a commercial contract template that's supported by a guide. And the clauses in this template contract really provide talking points that you can use to negotiate consent for an exploration company to access your land and undertake activities on that land. A couple of points to remember about this tool, and the first one is that it's a voluntary tool. You may decide, you might have a look at it and decide that you wish to use our tool, but you may also decide that you'd like to use something you've developed yourself or a version that the exploration company might provide. It really is entirely up to the parties involved how they wish to go about negotiating and agreeing that land access consent, and whether that's a hybrid of those three models. It very much comes down to what works for both parties involved. The tool is there if you aren't going to use it. It also can serve as a really useful conversation starter and thought prompter to start you thinking about what are the key points you really want to have a discussion with about an exploration company, and any special conditions you might want to consider imposing as part of that agreement, whether that's for things like a heritage listing or trust for nature covenants or some other conditions that we'll come to shortly. It's really about taking stock of those things that are really important to you and what's absolutely critical to you and how you undertake your business and potentially your agricultural business, and making sure that that's recognised in an agreement with the company. it is a flexible tool. Not everything in it will be relevant to you or your business or land holding. And on the flip side of that, not everything will necessarily be relevant to the explorer and the particular activity they may wish to undertake. It's really about making sure that you take that as a bit of a template and tailor it to suit your specific circumstances and the circumstances of the explorer, and start having those discussions about things like access, the conditions under which they may enter, compensation and how that might be calculated, communication and how the parties will keep one another informed, and also importantly dispute resolution. And while we hope that it doesn't come to that, I think it's an important point to make sure that it is included, if in the event, while we hope it doesn't, but if in the event that it does get to that. By law, an explorer must ensure that their exploration programs minimise the level of interference with other activities that might be occurring on the land, and this includes personnel and contractors that might be on the land, the dates and hours of operations, the areas of the property they're wishing to access, the routes and the use of roads and tracks, and your preference for communication, whether that's face-to-face or phone or email or written. That information on the screen right now provides you some of the probably really basic consent agreement clauses that you would expect to be included in just about all land access consent agreements, and some of those things that you should really be thinking about right up front if in the event you are to be approached by an explorer looking to access your property. There's also conditions that it's worth thinking about that may not be as general, and that may be specific to your property and the operations that you have occurring on your property. And these could be conditions that might be applied to, say, for example, reinforce your property's biosecurity and might relate to vehicle cleanliness. These could be conditions relating to soil management, the protection of important flora and fauna on your property, and also particular access to the property during what are critical times, such as lambing, calving and cropping seasons. So the issue of compensation. So compensation paid as part of an agreement will only equate to the loss of income you have suffered or the loss of amenity you have sustained. You don't cut a portion of the value of the minerals on your land because at this stage that the Crown still owns those minerals. Now, an exploration company may not want to establish a compensation agreement at the start because they may only be doing reconnaissance or low impact work that would not have any adverse impacts on your income or your amenity. And another point to remember here is that the compensation is not just about money. You can negotiate with the explorer on a whole range of things, extending from fencing to road resurfacing to farm equipment and so on and so forth. When it comes to a particular type of activity, so there will be a point in time where the explorer may not be able to do further work under their exploration until they've secured an approved work plan from the Earth Resources Regulator. And at this point in time, the explorer is required to gain a written compensation agreement from you. And this is very much different from a consent agreement. So the key difference being there is that a consent agreement is very much around access to your land, and a compensation agreement details how you'll be compensated if you're made worse off by the explorer's activities. So consent's very much about access, and compensation is essentially very much about that compensation in the event that you're worse off. And you and the explorer may decide to establish the compensation mechanisms up front, or you might decide until the explorer needs one under the legislation. Again, the really important point to stress with this tool and the issue of compensation and consent is that you need to think about what works for you and your own unique circumstances, and have that open and honest discussion with the explorer about that to really get an outcome that's advantageous for both parties. We absolutely appreciate that this is something that will no doubt be daunting for many of you. The idea of land access consent is something that is probably unfamiliar to a large number of you, and that's why we've developed a tool such as this. We'd also recommend that you seek professional advice and a professional opinion when it comes to these matters, particularly if you feel that there's particular matters within that you would like to get a second opinion from, and whether that's advice from your solicitor or accountant or agricultural advisor, you know, they are there to provide you with that trusted advice, and the government has an expectation that the explorer should reimburse you for any reasonable costs associated with obtaining that advice. I would just like to stress as well that we have held sessions with agricultural advisors, accountants and solicitors within the region over the course of the last 12 or 18 months. So a number of them will be aware of this tool and the Stavely ground release more broadly. Another question we often hear is, what if we get to a point where you and the explorer can't reach agreement about access to your property? And our first suggestion here is that you try an independent dispute resolution service. I think, look, critical to this getting an agreement in place is obviously those points that I touched on earlier about, you know, going into something like this with an open mind and an open and honest communication with the explorer, and really understanding what's critical to you and what's really important to you. But we do appreciate that there will be times where an agreement just can't be reached, and as I said, we do encourage you to try an independent dispute resolution service first, and you can go through services such as the Victorian Small Business Commission or Victoria's Mining Warden, and the contact details for these services are provided in the land access consent tool pack, which will circulate to you in the coming days. You or the exploration company can seek a ruling from VCAT or the Supreme Court in instances where it can't be agreed, as I touched on earlier. But again, it's really important we highlight that caveat there, that VCAT won't rule on whether or not the explorer can access your land. The explorer can access your land, and VCAT will only rule on the conditions and compensation that you as the landholder are entitled to. I think just summing up here, the really important point to make is that the vast majority of landholders and explorers work well together to negotiate consent that results in an outcome that works for all parties involved, and it's an amicable relationship. You'll see that through our landholder video that we'll share the link to in the coming days. It shows real farmers and real explorers that have been able to do this quite well, and have had you know, this activity undertaken on their properties, and it's worked for all involved. So I think that is a really important thing to remember here. I'm about to hand the floor over to Gippsland Prospecting, but before I do that, I just want to make sure you're aware of the obligations that minerals explorers have for informing the community. As part of their licence, explorers are required to share information about their plans and programs, and provide you with ample opportunity to express your views and feedback. Gippsland Prospecting does have a local community engagement officer who you'll meet shortly, and I'm sure will be already known to a number of you in the area, and he's there to assist in raising the company's awareness of the community's expectations, and you'll be able to have access to Gippsland Prospecting's contact details as well. They're also available on the Earth Web Resources website, but they'll be available in the information that they present shortly. In terms of the department, we're also more than happy to help wherever we can, and are keen to keep you informed about the work we're doing within the area. And our contact details are up on the slide there at the moment, both our email, or you can phone Donna, who you'll also meet a little bit later on, who's our field-based engagement officer for the region. We also publish a regular minerals newsletter and a regular Stavely newsletter, which you can sign up for on our website. And if you have a question, no matter how great or small that might be, please don't hesitate to get in touch. We're always more than happy to help wherever we can, and to if we don't know the answer, we're always more than happy to help facilitate in following that up. So I hope that's helped in providing some further information about minerals exploration in the area and the Stavely ground release. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end, and I see some of those have come through on the chat function, which is great to see. And I also note that we had quite a number of questions come through with the pre-registrations that were submitted, and we'll be getting to some of those as well throughout the session. So I'd now like to hand over to the Gippsland prospecting team. So that's Kent Ballas, Danny Grallett and Naomi Scott, and they'll provide a bit more information around their exploration program. I'll just bring them up now. And I'll hand over the floor to you, Kent.
Thanks very much, Brett. And thanks to all your team for the hard work you put in to organising these sessions. It's much appreciated. You've done a terrific job. I haven't got the slides there yet. But yeah, as Brett mentioned, we've got on the call from our team, myself, Naomi Scott, who's the General Counsel for what's now Battery Minerals, and Danny Grallett, who's next to me here. So we'll be sort of playing our part and explaining what we've got coming up. So the first thing I should point out, Gippsland Prospecting's made a funding agreement with Battery Minerals, which is an ASX listed exploration company. And I'll just throw over to Naomi to introduce Battery Minerals in that transaction. So thanks, Naomi.
Thanks, Kent, for the intro, and Brett for hosting the session. Good evening. It's a pleasure to present to you this evening. My name's Naomi Scott, and I'm the General Counsel for Battery Minerals. And as Kent just mentioned, Battery Minerals acquired Gippsland Prospecting, which is the holder of the license we're talking about today, in March 2020. So Battery Minerals is a diversified mining company with assets in Australia and Africa. It's listed on the Australian Stock Exchange under the ticker BAT. The board and management reflected in this slide here are seasoned representatives of the mining community who've developed world-class assets in harmony with the communities around those resources. Upon acquisition of Gippsland Prospecting this year, the former directors of that entity, Kent Ballas, here today, Alan Marlowe and Darrell Clark, joined us as part of the Battery Minerals team, and we're very grateful to have them on board with their expertise. And as a company, we've raised $5.5 million to complete the exploration in this license. So my background is human rights and social development. I worked in the United Nations as a peacekeeper for much of my career. And after that, I've since worked with Battery Minerals as legal counsel, which includes supporting the company to develop its assets in a responsible and transparent manner and in collaboration with you, the community. So I look forward to chatting with you and to the discussions that we're going to have this evening and to seeing you on the ground sometime in the future. Thanks, Kent.
Thanks, Naomi. Can we go to the next slide, please, Brett? So I'd like to introduce Danny Grallett, who has joined us as sort of our community relations liaison, and organiser for pretty much everything, and my good friend. So I'll just hand over to Danny now.
Yeah, so Kent, Danny. I grew up in Great Western on a sheep farm, a fifth generation local. I've got a 600-acre sheep farm here now that I've been running for quite a while. I went to school in Stawell and primary school in Great Western. Some of you may, or if you've been around the district for a while, may have noticed me at BP. I was one of the Bowser boys at BP for many years in the mid-2000s. Also worked at IGA. I'm by training, or in the last 15 years, I've worked as a mining engineer, and I currently run my own consultancy business on the side. And I've been working for Battery Minerals. I've been on board with Battery Minerals for about a month or so, and I'm pretty keen to help Battery Minerals advance their projects and develop potentially what will be a world-class resource for the most part, because what mining could potentially bring to the community and the benefits it brings to us all, indirectly and directly. So directly, we see, well, I have many friends that work at the Stavely Gold Mine, and the fruits of what Navarre Minerals have been doing in the district are flowing through to many of the local businesses. As an example of what a world-class asset can do, the Fosterville gold mine, the Bendigo, produced approximately 620,000 ounces of gold in 2019. And with the state government taking a 2.7% royalty on that, and equates to approximately $40 million of revenue. So, and that's just the royalties for the state government. That doesn't consider any of the costs that get spent within the local community. So there's a significant amount of money that gets generated through mining, and that's what I'm really keen to try and find in our district, the next big thing to help boost our economy along and the area within where we are. So you've already met Naomi and Kent, and as discussed, we've got Alan Marlowe, who's a pretty good rock geek and wizard, and knows a thing or two about rocks. So that's the main team we'll see on the ground for now, and hopefully, most likely, we'll probably start boosting employment as we start to get into things. Next slide, thanks, Brett. So the biggest aspect of what we're going to try and do as a company within the area, and not putting aside the exploration, is to try and make sure we leave the place as we found it, or if not better. Some of you may be aware that Project Platypus was set up by CRA, which is now Rio Tinto. The foundations of Project Platypus were in an exploration company. We've been workshopping in-house some ideas. As a local landowner, I've got some priorities and some passionate interests of mine that I'd like to help improve my property and my farm. And the biggest one for me is regenerative agriculture. The world's largest carbon sink is in our soil, but many of our farms are dirt, and trying to transform dirt into soil is the biggest potential for carbon sink and carbon storage on Earth. So that's a huge one for me. The other big ticket items we've been discussing in-house is continuing the good work that's been done in the past with revegetating windbreaks and erosion control. So as I said before, Project Platypus is probably the leading land care group within our district, and we're hoping to try and team up with them and expedite some of their priority agendas and help assist them in any way we can. So yeah, we're really wanting to be responsible citizens and work within the groups. So as I said, these are some of the priorities that we've come up with, but if there are any issues that you have as a local landholder you think we might be able to assist with, please come forward and suggest whatever you have, and if there's something of interest, we might better help out. The other one there I didn't touch on was wildlife rescue. So many of you have probably seen the many kangaroos on the roadsides, and a lot of the wildlife rescue ventures around are pretty poorly funded and could probably have the boost. So we're going to look into that as well. It should be noted that we're very much in our infancy of this exploration license, and we're developing these ideas as we go along. So as we hopefully get out and meet many of you, we'll try and understand what your issues or potential ideas might be. We can go to the next slide, please, Brett. I suppose the big thing for landholders is, will my property be affected? Will the environment be affected? And if so, when will it happen? This is just a really approximate schedule for the next little while. As I said, we're in our infancy and we're developing schedules and targets in the coming months. But from now until January, you'll see us hopefully engage with landholders and get agreements on the ground. And then from Feb to March, we'll continue those agreements and really knuckling down, trying to establish those relationships, the meaningful, beneficial relationships for us all. As Brett succinctly demonstrated, that landholders and exploration license holders have worked very well in the past, and we hope to continue that relationship. And then phase 3 will be just ongoing engagement with individuals on an individual basis once we start to identify some of these primary targets that we're interested in. Next slide, thanks, Brett. Brett touched on some of the odds or the chances that an exploration target might be turned into a mine. This is just some data I've pulled from Rio Tinto to further that point a little bit more. So 1 in 1,000 of the odds of a greenfield mineral project ever becoming a profitable mine. 1 in 3,333 of the odds of a greenfield mineral target ever becoming a world-class mine. And 10% is the amount of gold deposits with enough gold to justify any further development. Which, and the summary of that slide is that it's highly unlikely that anything will be discovered within our district, but we're hoping to find something, as all explorers do. And if you've been in this area long enough, you'll probably know that there have been many explorers over time that have been fairly unsuccessful, let alone the Stawell Gold Mine and recently the Stavely Minerals. So, yeah, pretty unsuccessful group. Next slide, thanks, Brett. So what does minerals exploration mean for the landholders? Brett's touched on a lot of this, but I'll just quickly brush over it again. As us as a company, we want to make sure we're operating in the most open and transparent, honest way we possibly can. We're not out to go behind people's backs or to be dishonest in any way. And if there's ever any issues or potential discrepancies with those types of ideas, please come forward and contact me or Kent and try and get them resolved. So as I said, Kent said before, I'll be the main point and the community liaison for Battery going forward. Yeah, so the next, as that Shield pointed out before, the main crux of what we're doing in the next few months is just meeting landholders and obtaining agreements. And then from there, we'll put boots on the ground and have some geologists looking over some rocks and properties, just trying to identify where the potential targets might be. Where possible and feasible, we're going to try and spend as much money of our budget as we possibly can within the local community. We're a seasoned community we're a seasoned mining community, and there's plenty of people that have got lots of skills in the area, so it shouldn't be a problem spending much money within the district. Then after that, once and if there is a potential target identified, there is the potential for machinery to be mobilised on site, and you might see drills and trucks and utes in the district on roads. At approximately 5 people is the number that you'll ever see on one exploration target drilling at one time. Give or take 1 or 2 with the geologist coming and going. Next slide, thanks, Brett. So most corporate companies have a set of values and they're all pretty similar, and they basically boil down to being a good person and acting honestly, but these are just some words to touch on that. We're going to be open and honest, as I've said. Understanding and communicating with people is just critical for all aspects of business, and we won't be staying away, or we're striving to be extremely understanding of all our people within our community. Acting responsibly, conducting heritage surveys where appropriate in the relevant authorities, and protecting Indigenous sites of cultural and spiritual significance. So we've already reached out to some of the traditional landholders, and we're working through with them to figure out what we need to do to working with them. And complying with all applicable legal regulatory requirements and as a minimum standard. So mining companies are probably one of the most regulated industries in our country, and we'll be developing our own procedures and standards above, and most likely which will be above and beyond what the legislation has in place. And that's just acting as a responsible business within the mining community. Next slide, thanks, Brett. I'll pass over to Kent to talk about rocks.
Thanks, Danny. Yeah, as I'm going to talk about the rocks. So my profession is an exploration geologist. That's what I've done for a bit too long now. So the 2 pictures there, like I guess to most people, sort of, indecipherable. I just sort of briefly want to explain a bit about the geology of Block 4. So I'll refer first to the image on the right. Down this sort of almost the centre of Block 4, we've got a structure known as the Moisten Fault. So if you look on that picture, the gold area lies to the east of the Moyston Fault, and the sort of purple pinky area lies to the west. And it's quite a major division in Eastern Australia. That it sort of divides, you know, one geological timescale from another, and one type of terrain from another. And what that means in a practical sense for us is that in one area we look for a particular type of gold deposit. So in the golden area, we're pretty much just looking for gold. And in the purple area, we're looking for copper and gold in a different type of deposit style. To us as geologists, this area is fascinating. It's got a fascinating history, and you know, what has happened there is incredible. So the story of Earth is amazing. So if you are interested, we'll be running field trips in the coming months when COVID restrictions allow, and we'll get that notice out to the community through our website or through a mail out, and everyone's welcome to join. I'll refer to the image on the left. So that shows sort of the same area, but with what we call prospects mapped out, or prospect areas. So these are areas that we've identified through research of historical data, from other explorers, from satellite data, from our own sort of reconnaissance on the roads, looking around. And these are sort of areas that we think, yeah, that's interesting. They could host a particular deposit style. So the point I want to make there is the whole, it's a huge 800 square kilometre block. We're certainly not going to find a deposit everywhere on that block. What we're talking about is something with a very small footprint, and it's like a needle in a haystack, what we're looking for. So we won't affect all. Yeah. So let's go on to the next slide there. So this, next slide, that's okay, Brett. Yep. So this next slide sort of shows a couple of working images of mine, how we think about geology. The rainbow coloured base maps there are magnetic images showing the structure of the Earth. And this is how we sort of start to understand what's going on with the rocks. We collect these data sets, and they're collated by the government over many years, and then we put them all together, and we try to understand where a deposit might be. So in this instance, I've just drawn red lines in an area that I might be interested in, and we'll intersect a whole number of properties. And we're probably just looking for a small spot along that line where a deposit might be. The image on the right is very similar, and the yellow dots show historical geochemical samples taken by other explorers. So the exploration's gone on in this block since, since the 1850s. The gold was first found out in this district, and ever since people have been looking more and more, and we think there can be more deposits found out there. So next slide, please, Brett. So what is our goal? We want to discover a world-class deposit, and we've put the team in place to do it. We've got the funding in place, and we're really excited about it. And the second part of it is we want to be a good citizen of the district. We want to work with everyone in the district. We don't want to be in conflict with anyone. And as Danny pointed out, we want to leave this place better than what we found it. So, planning all sorts of community initiatives we want to support, and over the coming weeks and months we'll engage with the community and nut out what exactly that will mean. On to the final slide. So there's our contact details. Anyone that's got any issues or problems, my phone number's there, email, Naomi's email, please contact us. We're approachable people. Alan and myself have been out today chipping rocks. That's why I'm sort of 5 years here, and a bit hot, but we'll be around the district. If you see us on the roadsides, say good day. Al loves meeting new people, chatting, and yeah, Danny will be in touch with you. A lot of you might know him, so yeah, thanks very much. I appreciate your time and hope to see you soon.
Thanks for that, Kent. Thanks, Danny, and thanks to you also, Naomi. We are just about to get into questions. Before I do that, I do just want to take a moment to introduce another member of our team, Donna Mongan, who's our field-based engagement officer. It's most likely in the coming weeks and months as COVID restrictions ease, you'll see Donna out and about, and she'll be our face on the ground. So I'm just going to hand over to Donna to do a quick introduction, and then we'll get stuck into the questions, which we've received plenty of, which is great. There is a question, I think, from Liz that I'll just address quickly around what about the questions that were asked with the registrations. Don't worry, Liz, we've got all those, and we'll be addressing those throughout the Q&A session. But that being said, I'd like to quickly hand over to Donna Mongan to introduce her. So welcome to you, Donna.
Hello, everybody. As Brett mentioned, my name's Donna Mongan. I am the Community Engagement Officer for Minerals Development Victoria, and I've been in touch with some of you over the past few days regarding this session, and during this session with a few little technological details. So I'm really looking forward to actually seeing you face to face. I have connections with that area right through to past Horsham, so I am familiar with your turf. And again, I'd really like to send you some information after the session tomorrow, most likely, covering off on important details that we covered during this session, and the land access consent tool and video, just for your information. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to give me a call. You've got my phone number, you've got my email, and I really would cherish the opportunity to work with you through the project. Thank you.
Many thanks for that, Donna, and I'm sure many of you will be seeing her out and about in the weeks and months ahead. We now have reached question time, which at 8 o'clock is fantastic. We have got plenty of time for questions. I'm going to kick it off by going to some of the ones that have come in with the registrations prior to, and I'm going to introduce you to another one of our colleagues here, Annie Farrow, who's the Acting Manager of Resource Strategy and Industry Investment. I'm going to start with you, Annie. Question with the registrations: why are landholders only being told about this 2 years after the government released the blocks for exploration in 2018? Is this a serious community consultation?
Thanks, Brett. Yeah, good question. Thank you for it, whoever posed it. This isn't actually the first time landholders have been informed about the Stavely ground release, and there was an associated tender with it. I first joined in the organisation in late 17, and certainly we were out and about since then. We have undertaken quite a number of engagements, particularly when the ground release was announced. We've held sessions across and around the Grampians area. We've also attended sheepvention at least 2 or 3 times, and we've attended the Horsham the Wimmera Field Days on 2 or 3 occasions as well. As each licensee has received their licence, we've come out to the region and undertaken community information sessions. Last year we did Mortlake and Dunkeld, and places in the north. We apologise, we haven't been out this year. COVID has prevented us from coming out. But yeah, this isn't the first time. We've had a regular newsletter. I'm sorry if you have missed out and that this is the first time you've heard about it. But certainly get in contact with Donna, and she can provide you with a lot more information. Thanks.
Thanks, Annie. And I'm going to stay with you for the next question as
Sure.
well. Why is government charging rent for private title for the whole area for a peppercorn amount when government does not own the titles? You cannot charge rent for what you do not have the title ownership for, is the question that's come through as well. Hand back over to you, Annie.
Sure, thank you. There's actually quite a complicated question and complicated answer, so hopefully I'll be able to explain it well. So the rent is the amount paid to the Crown, i.e. the government, for the receipt of a right to explore for minerals. So that is, it's a payment for being granted an exploration licence, and with it the ability, subject to all regulations, to conduct exploration activities. Now it's appropriate that that rent comes to the Crown just as a royalty, excuse me, just as a royalty is paid if a mining company is extracting a mineral, so too is a payment made for exploring for the mineral. Now, as it was mentioned by Brett in his presentation, in Australia, in Victoria, the Crown owns the minerals on behalf of all the people. So your freehold title does not provide you with any rights over minerals found on your land, nor does it provide you with any rights to explore for minerals. If you want to explore for minerals on your private property, you would need to apply for an exploration licence. And you would similarly have to pay rent to the Crown. So it's very old-fashioned, these terms of Crown and royalty and rent. I guess it goes back to, well, it goes back forever. But the rent is basically just a payment to the Crown in lieu of being granted that right. Now, in terms of whether it's a peppercorn rent, I couldn't say. It's actually quite complicated. I know it's 6.9 units per 10 graticules, and a graticule's, let's say, roughly a square kilometre, and I think this block Kent is 809 square kilometres, but I can't actually remember off the top of my head, I'm sorry, what the fee units is, but when we get back to you with regard to the written answers, we will provide that to you. I think that's enough on that question.
Thanks for that one, Annie. I'm going to pass over now to some of the questions that have come in from the chat, and I'm going to hand over to Gippsland Prospecting on this one. The question is, what does exploration involve? And I think it might be good, Ken, if you can just tell us about what exploration involves for your program.
Yeah, no worries. So, like at an early stage, and a good example of the things we did today, I was just driving around roads in the local district looking at, you know, the colour of the soil, the topography, comparing it with maps that I have in my iPhone now, but traditionally we'd have paper maps and we'd roll them out on the bonnet of cars. So we at an early stage, we just try to understand the geology. It's geology, you know, it happens over a very, very long period of time, and in you know, hundreds of millions to billions of years. And so a lot of things happen, and it makes it complex to understand the story of the Earth. And so then you know, when we gain access to a property, we typically might go look for actual rocks, you know, because there's not rocks everywhere. There's soil and grass and trees, and then we might find a rock and look at it, you know, and I'll hand it to Al, and he'll get out his hand lens and look at it in small detail and make an assessment of what that rock means to us. And then at the next stage, we might bring in a drill rig if we jump through all those hurdles. And typically, you know, as a guess, we might look at 100 sites and we might drill at 2, you know. So there's a lot of early stage work that we do, a lot of data collation that leads to you know, targeted, you know, bringing in heavy equipment and targeting it exactly to achieve our goal. Thanks.
Thanks, Ken. going to come back to you, Annie, with a question that we received with the registrations, and this may be one you need to take on notice, but is there an obligation to return property to the way it was before exploration in a required time frame?
Yeah, good question. Thank you, Brett. So all disturbed areas need to be revegetated and reinstated back to the natural surface or to a stable landform similar to that of the surrounding undisturbed areas, unless a work plan specifies that can be different. A work plan being a plan approved by the Earth Resources Regulator. So the licensee must ensure that those disturbed areas are rehabilitated as soon as possible after the completion of works. I think the work plan actually would specify the dates, but that would be on a case-by-case basis because it depends upon the degree of disturbance and the acreage of or the area of disturbance. The licensee must also ensure that Indigenous species are used in the rehabilitation and that they're sourced from the local area. Now, there are specific guidelines provided to explorers in the Code of Practice around rehabilitation, and that Code of Practice, I don't know whether, I can't remember whether it was mentioned earlier in your presentation, Brett, but it's a Code of Practice for minerals explorers, and that's freely available on our Earth Resources website. Donna will provide a link to it, and it's actually quite a useful document full of information that you too as landholders and community members can read up about what are the obligations that an explorer must meet, and the rehab ones are in there as well.
And staying with you, Annie, the next question, what happens to wildlife protection along the river and Aboriginal cultural heritage if any of it is protected?
Okay, yep, good question again, thank you. So I think there was another question about the river, but I'll answer the wildlife one first. Under the Minerals Resources Sustainable Development Act, an exploration licensee has to submit a work plan approval request if it intends to do any work that would exceed what is defined as something greater than low impact exploration. And generally that includes matters where the explorer might pose a risk to flora and fauna. And when the explorer submits this work plan, the Earth Resources Regulator will review it and also not only review the proposal, but what the explorer explains of how they're going to mitigate risks to things like wildlife or flora and fauna, but then sends the proposal to DELP, Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, I think I've got that order right, who obviously have experts in environmental matters, and they would assess that work plan to determine whether the explorer's actions and mitigation strategies are sufficient to enable them to comply with the Flora and Fauna Guarantee Act, the Federal Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act, and any other Environment Act that protects flora and fauna. So that's how that happens. In addition to the fact that the explorer cannot operate within 200 metres of a waterway, and if they want to operate closer than that to the river, again that triggers the need for a work plan and in that case it's more likely to be assessed both by the flora and fauna people, but also all of the water people. The Aboriginal cultural heritage, absolutely that is protected. That is protected throughout the state of Victoria on both freehold land and Crown land. So anytime an explorer is operating, they need to be mindful of Aboriginal cultural heritage. It's illegal to damage Aboriginal cultural heritage. If the explorer is intending to operate in an area that is deemed under the Aboriginal Heritage Act to be an area of cultural sensitivity, and it intends to do work that under the Aboriginal Heritage Act that is deemed to be ground disturbing, then the explorer must stop work and obtain a cultural heritage management plan. Otherwise, it can continue to work. If the explorer finds or that the exploration activity reveals Aboriginal cultural heritage, it must stop work, and that those artefacts must be verified by the local registered Aboriginal party, and then a whole lot of other things start to kick in under the Aboriginal Heritage Act. So Aboriginal cultural heritage is well protected in the state of Victoria. Enough, I think.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Annie. There's a couple of comments I'll just note in the chat function around some connectivity issues that some people are having. I think John has already made the point in there, but I will just reiterate for those of you that may not have seen it. We will be making a recording of this session available online afterwards, so you will be able to catch up on anything you may have missed, and we'll certainly be circulating the answers to the Q&As via emails in the coming days and weeks. I'm going to come back to you, Annie, with a question from the chat, and this is one that has came up in yesterday's session as well and came through with a number of the registration. It's always one that's of high interest around access and determination on access. So I think probably more a clarification from someone around what we're saying is we don't have the right to refuse because the mining company can take it further if they choose. Is that right?
Yeah, so another way of putting that is can I refuse entry to my property? Let's answer that last one first. So I think, Brett, you did indicate that the Crown, i.e. the government, owns the minerals. Landholders and occupiers do not have absolute power to control access to their private property. So the Crown owns the minerals on behalf of the people. An Act of Parliament, and in this case it's the Minerals Resources Sustainable Development Act, gives the government the right to grant licences to companies to search for minerals, and they can undertake that search on both Crown land and freehold land. But a licensee must gain your informed consent in order to enter your property. So if an agreement to access your property can't be reached, then the explorer may indeed take you to VCAT or the Supreme Court. We suggest you get legal advice. The Act says or suggests that VCAT and the Supreme Court would only determine how much compensation you're entitled to. Those institutions cannot decide upon whether or not the licensee has the right to enter your property. That is sort of taken as given. So that said, most explorers do not want to cause any angst. They will reassess their exploration targets. Sometimes they may have sufficient flexibility for them to work instead on the roadside or on a neighbour's property, but sometimes not. And they'll try and negotiate a deal with you. I think it's in everyone's interest to try and sit down and come to some kind of agreement rather than heading off in a legal track.
You can catch your breath and have a glass of water, Annie, because I'm going to let you off the hook for the next couple of questions, and I'm going to go to Ken and get the Gippsland prospecting team. Ken, a question that we had come through with the pre-registrations. If you need to access our property, will you organise a time that suits us?
Yes, is the short answer. So we'll work with landholders absolutely in all cases. So times of access, you know, like the routes of access, all the details around this, we'll work with landholders to something that works for both of us.
Fantastic, thanks. Staying with you, how much notice is given to landholders if Gippsland Prospecting wishes to carry out exploration on their land? If mineral exploration is to take place on my land, will I be given more than 8 hours notice, and how is this information to be communicated?
We'll give a minimum of 7 days notice or by mutual agreement some other amount of time, but typically we will negotiate a land access agreement and negotiate some hours of access and work with, you know, have a sort of positive communication with the landholder all along. So typically notice of access will be much longer than 7 days, you know, months ahead if we need to access for, say, drilling. We plan things out very carefully. So have you know, dates and multiple meetings prior to anything like that occurring. Thanks.
Thanks, Ken. And staying with you, a couple of questions have come through regarding probably more corporate structures, just regarding the difference between Gippsland prospecting and battery minerals. It might just be worth, are you able to just provide I know you did touch on it in your slides, but just provide an overview of the relationship between those two companies?
Yeah, I can speak to that one, Brett. So Battery Minerals owns Gippsland Prospecting. So Battery Minerals is the holding company, and it is legally responsible for the actions of Gippsland Prospecting, which is the owner of the license.
Thanks for that, Naomi. And we're going to go back to you, Kent. What are the plans if some minerals are discovered in the area?
Well, at the end of the day, I said in the presentation, we're looking for a world-class mine, so we'll go through all of the processes that are involved in, you know, making that happen, which, you know, briefly would mean years of exploration, then years of environmental approvals, and various other state approvals as per the regulations. Like the amount of work involved is enormous, and it's years of work, and I often describe it like a baton race. You know, these projects take many years to complete. As an example, our neighbour, Stavely Minerals, has been at work for, I think, around a decade or over a decade, and probably spent, at a guess, $100 million exploring in Victoria. So what we're talking about is not a mine tomorrow, not a mine next year or the year after or the year after that. You know, it will be a long process to achieve what we want to achieve. But you know, every journey starts with the first step, and this is the first step. Thanks. And I'll throw to Danny.
If there are minerals on your property, or if they're not, then as Ken alluded to or pointed out, we're going to be having an open door policy. And if you'd like to find out what's on your property, please come forward and have a chat with us. We'll be more than happy to take you through what might or may not be on your property.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Danny. I'm going to go to you first on this one, Ken, and then I might come to you, Annie, if you'd like to add anything further to it. But it's a question around compensation, and what compensation does the landholder receive if Gippsland Prospecting wishes to come onto their property?
Yeah, so that'll be negotiated as part of our land access agreements on a case-by-case basis. So we don't have like a set structure, but you know, in each case we'll compensate for the, you know, loss of amenity if there is that, and farmers may wish to, you know, get compensation on other things like, you know, a road may need to be built, a new fence may need to be put up. You know, I know farms are a capital intensive venture, so there's a range of things we can, you know, negotiate on, and as we've alluded to previously, it will affect a small number of landholders. You know, we're not talking about going out to everyone's property and starting drilling. That's not the case. And do you have anything to add there, Annie?
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Kent. They're great questions tonight, aren't they? So under the Minerals Resources Sustainable Development Act, landholders and land occupiers must be compensated if there is any loss of income or loss of amenity or any damage directly caused by exploration activity. The list of things that might be compensated for is actually articulated in the Act, but it's a non-exhaustive list. Whether or not you can get compensated for what I would call the inconvenience of exploration is purely a commercial matter. So that's for you and Kent to work out. So there are some things for which you must be compensated for, and if you go to the tool that Brett talked about, that's all documented in that tool. I understand Donna will send you a direct link to the tool on our website tomorrow or in coming days, but we would sort of suggest that you get some professional advice, but it's unlikely that you'll need to talk about compensation now, because the first thing is to talk about consent, providing consent to access your properties. Compensation is quite a long way off, Kent, isn't it? Because, you know, it's based on activity. Yeah, so that should be it.
Thanks, Annie. Ken, I'm going to come back to you, and there's a couple of questions we've had come through, or both in the pre-registration and also in the chat around what, and I know this is quite speculative and it's quite some way down the track, which is a point that we've been, both you and I have been making tonight and others, but what might a mining operation look like if you were to discover something? There's questions around, would it be open cut, would it be underground? Appreciate that it is probably all quite speculative, but I might just ask you to offer a view or an opinion on that one.
Yeah, thanks for the question, and it's a good one. The answer to that, and most people that are in the district would know, the Stawell mine. You know, that's how a major mining operation looks in this area. The Stawell mine's nearly in the centre of Stawell, and it's, you know, if you're in Stawell, you wouldn't be aware it's there. So that typically is what the type of footprint what we're looking forward to have on the surface of the land.
And to complement that, the Stawell mine was first developed in the 70s, and regulations and environmental procedures then were very much not what they are now. And there's a much more stringent process to get a mine approved. So a modern day mining footprint will be much different to what the Stawell gold mine is. I've worked at the Costerfield gold mine, which is just out of Heathcote, and their footprint is very small. It's a farmer that owns the property. The farmer's within, I'd say, 4 iron of the mine, golfing terms, 4 iron, and there's noise requirement must be complied by, and the farmer still lives happily there. So, and that's an example of modern day mining footprint.
Thanks, Danny. I'm gonna stay with you on this one, because I think you might be familiar with this project. But how will Gippsland Prospecting's minerals exploration activity impact the proposed East Grampians pipeline project?
My farm is on the Great Western Moyston Road, and the pipeline's going through my property, and I'm going to link up to it and be part of it. The trenches that we dug and the plants that we laid will be helpful for us and trying to identify what minerals are there, if there are any, but it's largely not going to influence or impact anything that we do or they do, and will be very much independent from what they do.
Great, thank you. And a couple of questions around animals on properties. So 2 in particular here, I'll ask them both to you. If you access our property, what protocols are in place as our dogs roam our whole property and we have livestock? And a follow-up to that one, an overarching question of, is it safe, minerals exploration activities safe for livestock? I think you might be on mute. You might just need to unmute your microphone.
Thanks, Brad. So my family have got a water boring business in the district, and if you've ever seen a water boring drill rig, it is a very similar setup to that. In terms of individual policies in the biosecurity for your farm, we will make sure we comply with whatever standards you have to control your animals or stock above and beyond what our policies are. So we'll always make sure we complement whatever your requirements are in that respect.
Thanks, Danny. And another one looking probably a little bit further down the track, but again, I might just ask you to offer a view or an opinion on this one. But if it does include our land, is the question, what exactly does that mean for us and the farm? Do you actually purchase the land? And I'm going to assume that this question has come if you were to progress to something more commercial.
Depending on what the deposit is, the type of deposit, and the depth, the deposit, style of deposit, that will largely govern what type of footprint it is. So the main differences are in either an open pit, and this is all very hypothetical if we do find something, which the odds are very low to keep in mind. But if we were to find a deposit which is an open pit, obviously the footprint of an open pit is much more drastic than an underground. But in saying that, it's an open pit, there are environmental and regulatory requirements to get an open pit approved, much more stringent and heavy duty going than what it is to get an underground footprint approved, purely because of the size of the land and the efforts required to get something like that happening. But yes, if and when there is a deposit found on a property, it will be required, and the landholder will be compensated very generously, typically.
Thank you, and I'm going to come back to you, Annie, for this one. Why is the heritage listed Wimmera River and reserves included in the area?
Yep, good question. The Wimmera River is safeguarded by a number of regulations under the Minerals Act and the Water Act and presumably the Heritage Act. So that's why it was retained within the boundaries of the ground release and subsequently the blocks that we tendered, and likewise for reserves. So you can't, I think I said earlier, you can't undertake exploration activity within 200 metres of a waterway. Now, if an explorer wants to operate within that 200 metres, it will automatically trigger the need for a work plan, which has a much higher level of regulatory oversight. So the explorer would have to submit a plan which identifies all of the environmental risks that its proposed activities would pose, and the planned mitigation strategies are around those risks. Now, the Earth Resources Regulator would then review the work plan, but also refer that work plan to experts. So it'll send the work plan and the mitigation strategies over to DELP, but also in this case, if it's around a river, to the local catchment management authority and the local water authority. Now, the regulator, our Earth Resources Regulator, will not approve that work plan until DELP and the water authorities approve the mitigation strategies and is able to say to the Earth Resources Regulator, yes, the mitigation strategies and the plans within this work plan are sufficient to ensure that Gippsland Prospecting will be able to comply with the Water Act and all of the other related environmental acts. With regard to reserves, again, these are safeguarded by regulations in other acts, depending upon the type and nature of the reserve, but the same process applies as I described for the river, that DELP would have to sign off. Now, in most cases, special permission is needed for any exploration on what we would classify as restricted Crown land. And restricted Crown land does include flora and fauna reserves, wildlife reserves, natural feature reserves, scenic reserves, cave reserves, geological reserves. I can't remember them all. Scenic reserves, bushland reserves. So reserves, and because they're restricted Crown land, the explorer can't go onto those until it has a work plan, and that DELP has given its permission for activity to take place in those areas.
Thank you, Annie. We are just about at time, folks, but I am going to squeeze in one or two more questions that have just come in only recently on the chat function. And Kent and Danny, I'm going to pose these ones to you. These ones are in regards to potentially target areas or where you might be targeting. So there's a question on there around does the company know what properties they will be drilling on now, or potentially which companies would be looking more preferable due to the geology?
Short answer on drilling is no, we don't know which properties we'll be drilling on now. The second part of the question is yes, we do know some areas that we think are more preferable due to the geology. So, you know, some farmers will be contacting over the coming weeks to arrange the land access consent, and then progressing further. As we go on, there's different activities that we'll undertake, different studies using satellite data, for instance, and this may enable us to narrow down our search. So thank you.
Thanks, Ken. And I think this will be the last one for the evening, but coming back to you, it's a question around size of areas likely to be accessed. The question is, what size land is likely to not be accessed? Are small acreages likely to be of interest or not of interest?
Typically, we'll focus on large acreages, but in some cases, small acreages may be of interest, but there's a whole lot of government regulation around proximity to housing and these sorts of things. So our strong preference is to do our work on large acreages.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kent. And I think that brings a number of the questions we've had to a close, and I'm really going to bring tonight's session to a close now. A couple of sort of wind-up points I would just like to make. Firstly, thank you to all of you for your participation tonight, for your registrations, for your calls over the last couple of days. I know many of you have spoken with Donna about the session and for showing an interest and for attending tonight. We appreciate that. We are heading into what is a very busy time of year in what is a very strange year for all of us. So we certainly do appreciate you making the time available to attend this evening's session. In terms of the questions, those that we did receive with the pre-registrations that we maybe didn't get time to get to tonight, or those that we may have missed in the chat function, don't panic. We will be getting written responses to all the questions, both those we have answered and those we didn't quite get around to out to you in the coming weeks and days. Do give us a little bit of time, because there is quite a volume of questions, which is great to see. I think it's just reflective of the level of interest that there is in this issue in the area. I'd just like to take the opportunity to pass on a big thank you to all of my colleagues and to the Gippsland prospecting team that have been involved in tonight's session. So Kent Ballas, Danny Grallett, Naomi Scott, many thanks to the three of you for making the time available tonight to participate. To Annie Farrow and Donna Mongan, thanks to both of you for all your efforts tonight. One person you haven't seen tonight, although you may have seen his name on the chat, John Dunleavy, another colleague of mine who's put in a large amount of work in the days leading up to tonight's session and also tonight to make tonight happen. So despite the luxury of sitting in front of a computer at home, there is still an equal amount of work that goes into making virtual sessions like this tonight happen. So I think for some of us, in some respects, think it's more work in some respects to make something like this happen. And as much as we would all prefer to be out with you in person in the region, we much prefer to do things that way. Obviously, certain restrictions don't quite allow for that, but we certainly do hope you'll be seeing some more of us early into the new year and beyond. And a final note from me, and I will say this now, today is the 25th of November, which of course means that it is exactly 1 month until Christmas. So in signing off, I'd just like to pass on my best wishes to all of you for a happy and a safe festive season, and I look forward to chatting, and certainly the team look forward to chatting with hopefully many of you, if not before Christmas, into the new year. Thanks all.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Annie.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Brett.
Bye.